This story is titled, My Fiancé's Parents Forced Me to Sign a Prenup, which I feared. But when I became a successful businessman, I thanked them because after her betrayal, I took everything that belonged to me. Sup Reddit, I never thought I'd be that guy posting his divorce revenge story online. But here we are. I've got an energy drink in hand and a story to tell that might help some of you avoid the hell I went through. Or maybe you'll just enjoy watching karma deliver a knockout punch to some entitled rich folks. Either way, buckle up for this ride. Let me give you some background first. I grew up solidly working class. My dad fixed motorcycles for a living, and my mom taught high school. Nothing fancy about our lifestyle, but they busted their asses to make sure I had opportunities they never did. I managed to get decent grades in school and landed a scholarship to State College for game development. Life hit me hard during my junior year when I lost my dad to a heart attack. That loss fucked me up emotionally, but it also lit a fire under my ass to make something of myself. I was determined not to let his sacrifices be for nothing. After college, I bounced between various coding jobs while building side projects that inevitably went nowhere. My dating life was your typical mid-20s disaster. Mostly girls who lost interest when they realized my Toyota Corolla wasn't just my everyday car, but my only car. Then I got this idea for restaurant management software that wouldn't make anyone's panties drop at parties, but it solved real problems for an industry stuck in the technological Stone Age. So there I was at 26 years old, living off instant noodles and Monster energy drinks, coding 18 hours a day in my buddy Marcus's garage that we'd converted into the world's saddest startup headquarters. We had this app idea that was basically a management tool for restaurants, boring as hell, but solving a real problem that nobody else was addressing. We had no venture capital funding, no fancy office space, just 2 dudes, 3 monitors, and an air conditioning unit that leaked all over our extension cords whenever the temperature went above 80 degrees. My car was this beat-up Corolla with 190,000 miles on it that made a sound like a dying whale whenever I drove it over 55 miles per hour. My apartment had those paper-thin walls where you could hear your neighbor taking a piss, brushing their teeth, or having an existential crisis at 2 in the morning. But I was grinding every single day, putting in the hours when nobody was watching. That's what I believe separated the winners from the losers. What you do when nobody's clapping for you. Marcus was always the social one between us. I was perfectly happy eating microwave burritos and coding until my eyeballs bled. But he'd drag me out occasionally with comments like, "Dude, vitamin D is actually important," or "We need to network or we'll die alone in this garage." So when he mentioned this charity event for local businesses, I went along with it. Not because I gave a shit about networking, but because he'd been putting up with my broke ass using his garage as an office for months. That's when I met Sophia. She was 25 at the time, working the registration table at this charity event. She had this confident and polished demeanor, wearing a simple navy dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. The first thing I noticed was that she actually made eye contact when people talked to her, not doing that half-distracted phone checking that most people do these days. The second thing I noticed was that she kept looking over at me while I awkwardly tried to balance a plastic cup and a paper plate of cheese cubes. Later, Marcus clued me in on who she really was. Her family owned this chain of high-end jewelry stores across 4 states. They weren't billionaire rich, but they were definitely in that vacation in Italy twice a year and have a yacht named after their daughter, wealthy category. The Hartwells were basically local royalty. Their name was on half the buildings downtown, including the library and the west wing of the hospital. I had no clue why she was into me. Maybe she liked that I didn't know who her family was or give a shit about their status. Maybe she was rebelling against daddy's expectations. Maybe the dating pool in our mid-sized town was just that shallow. Whatever it was, we clicked immediately. She actually laughed at my terrible jokes and seemed genuinely interested in our boring-ass app project. "So it's like project management but specifically for restaurants?" she asked during our first real conversation. "Yeah, basically tracking inventory, schedules, permits, all that boring shit that keeps restaurants from collapsing or going 200% over budget," I explained, expecting her eyes to glaze over like most people's did when I talked about work. Instead, she nodded thoughtfully and said, "My dad's always complaining about restaurant partners using outdated systems. He had this massive headache with our store renovation in Sacramento because the contractor was literally using Excel spreadsheets from 2005. That was the moment right there. A rich girl who could have been talking to anyone at this fancy charity mixer was genuinely interested in my pipe dream startup. In retrospect, maybe I fell for the oldest trick in the book. Someone actually listening to me talk about my passion. 8 months later, I was shopping for a ring I could barely afford. And somehow she said yes when I proposed. I should have seen the red flags immediately. When she said yes, she immediately called her parents before anyone else. Not her best friend, not her sister, but mommy and daddy first. When I met them for the first time, her dad, Robert, shook my hand with this look like he was evaluating livestock at a county fair. Her mom, Patricia, asked me all casual like, "And what neighborhood did you grow up in?" Then barely concealed her horror when I mentioned the working class part of town where my dad fixed motorcycles for a living. But the biggest red flag I ignored was when Robert insisted on throwing us this massive engagement party at their lake house, even though I wanted something small and intimate. "It's not about what you want, son," Robert had said, clapping me on the shoulder with a grip that was just a bit too tight. "In this town, how you announce these things matters. The Hartwells have a certain standard to maintain." I should have told him to shove his standard up his ass right then and there, but I was too busy being amazed that someone like Sophia would marry someone like me. It was a classic mistake. When you think you're playing out of your league, you'll put up with all kinds of shit just to stay in the game. The day of our engagement party started with Sophia's mom, Patricia, taking her shopping for the perfect announcement outfit, while Robert invited me to come by the lake house early to have a man-to-man chat. I figured maybe he wanted to welcome me to the family or give me some fatherly advice, since my own dad had passed away years ago. It shows what an absolute idiot I was. I drove my wheezing Corolla up their winding driveway, past manicured gardens that probably cost more to maintain monthly than I made in a year. The lake house was this massive timber and stone mansion with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the water. Robert met me at the door in a polo shirt that definitely cost hundreds of dollars, looking like he just stepped out of a rich white guy's monthly photo shoot. "Right on time, I like that," he said, leading me into his office. But we weren't alone. There was this dude in a suit sitting there with a stack of papers spread across Robert's mahogany desk. "David, this is our family attorney," Robert said, closing the door behind me with a soft click that felt oddly final. I was honestly a bit scared around these loaded people, not going to lie. "We need to discuss some paperwork before tonight's announcement," he continued. I stood there in my jeans and a halfway decent button-up that I'd bought specifically for this party, while Robert explained the situation to me. "Listen, son, nothing personal, but you're bringing absolutely zero to this marriage except student debt and a pipe dream. This agreement protects what's ours, the family legacy." His lawyer nodded along, pushing the papers toward an empty chair that was clearly meant for me. "It's quite standard in situations with significant asset disparities," the lawyer added in that smarmy tone all expensive lawyers seem to master. I sat down slowly, feeling like I'd been completely ambushed. "What kind of agreement are we talking about?" I asked, though I was starting to get a pretty clear picture. "Prenuptial," Robert said, like he was discussing the weather. "It outlines what happens to assets in case of divorce. Basically states that what's ours stays ours. What Sophia's stays, Sophia's." I started flipping through the document. It was 20-something pages of dense legal jargon that might as well have been written in ancient Greek. "I'd like to read this properly, maybe have someone look it over for me," I said, trying to maintain some dignity in this situation. Robert actually laughed like I'd told the funniest joke he'd heard all year. "We're announcing your engagement in 2 hours. Either we announce with this signed, or we'll need to reconsider the engagement announcement entirely." The lawyer shifted uncomfortably but didn't contradict his client. "You're asking me to sign a complex legal document I haven't read," I said, raising an eyebrow. "Should I also promise my firstborn and hand over my passwords while I'm at it?" Although I sounded petty and poor, I pressed on. "I'm asking you to acknowledge reality," Robert replied, his fake friendly tone dropping for the first time. "You're marrying into a family with significant assets. We didn't build all this to have half of it walk out the door because you and Sophia can't make it work." Patricia walked in then with this fake-ass smile, touching my shoulder like we were old friends. "It's just standard for our family, dear. All the spouses sign one. Barbara with Michael, Todd with Jenny, and now you with Sophia." "Did you give them 2 hours to review it too?" I asked. Patricia's smile tightened noticeably. They understood what was at stake. I asked if I could at least take it to another room and read it without them staring at me like vultures. Robert reluctantly agreed, and I spent the next hour trying to decipher legal language in their guest bedroom. The agreement was absolutely brutal. Everything they owned stayed theirs. Everything their daughter would inherit stayed hers. And anything we built during marriage would be split according to contribution, which basically meant whoever paid for it owned it. And what was mine, well, that stayed mine too, but let's be honest about what I actually owned at that point. There was a clause about infidelity that seemed pretty standard. Cheating meant you lost rights to certain marital assets. I barely paid attention to it since I had no intention of cheating on my future wife. When I came back to the office, I asked if Sophia knew about this document. Of course, Robert said smoothly. It's for her protection. I sat there looking at the pen they'd laid out for me, thinking about Sophia, about the life I thought we were going to build together, about how absolutely shitty it would feel to cancel an engagement party because I wouldn't sign their paperwork. If you're planning to be married forever, this document is meaningless anyway, Patricia added with that same tight smile. So I signed it like a complete fucking idiot. I signed it. That night at the party, Robert made this big speech about welcoming me to the family. David represents the values we hold dear: hard work, determination, and a commitment to excellence, he announced to a room full of people who made more in interest payments than I made all year. The whole time, that prenup sat in his safe with my signature still drying on the page. When I finally told Sophia about it later that night, she just shrugged and said her parents made all her boyfriends sign NDAs just to date her. So this was normal for them. Don't worry about it, she said dismissively. It's just how they protect the family business. It doesn't mean anything for us. Your dad basically said I was marrying you for money, I told her, still processing what had happened. Daddy's just protective, she replied without missing a beat. He'll come around once he sees how amazing you are. Spoiler alert. He did not, in fact, come around. The first few years of marriage were pretty good, all things considered. We moved into this house that her parents helped us buy. And by helped, I mean they bought it and put it mostly in Sophia's name, with me on a tiny percentage for tax purposes. I kept working on my app while taking side coding gigs to pay my half of the bills. I wasn't focused on property percentages or ownership details back then. I was locked in, completely obsessed with building something that mattered. While Sophia was binging Real Housewives and planning brunches with her girlfriends, I was buried in code like a madman. The app wasn't just a side hustle anymore. It became my oxygen. I was living off caffeine, power naps, and this unshakable belief that I was building something real, something that no one could take credit for but me. Sophia insisted that we split everything 50-50 despite her family money, which I actually respected at the time. She said she wanted us to build something together, not just live off her parents' wealth. I didn't even argue about it. I was too busy trying to prove myself worthy of being in this family. Every morning I was up at 4 a.m. coding before my real work started at 8. Every weekend while Sophia was brunching with her friends at some upscale cafe, I was hunched over my laptop fixing bugs and adding new features. No days off, no vacations, no breaks. When you've got nothing to fall back on, you don't get the luxury of quitting or taking it easy. Sophia worked at her family's corporate office handling their marketing department. She wasn't spoiled like I initially expected. She worked hard and had actual skills. We were partners, or so I thought at the time. The Hartwell family dinners, however, were a special kind of torture. Every Sunday we'd head over to the main family residence for this formal dinner, where Robert would hold court like some feudal lord, asking me pointed questions about my little app and whether I'd considered getting a real job with the family business. Patricia would just smile while occasionally dropping gems like, "Not everyone is meant for entrepreneurship, dear." If I had $1 for every time someone at that dinner table said, "You know, jewelry retail is actually a growth industry if you understand the market segments," I could have funded my startup myself. In year 4, everything changed. The app finally took off after this huge hotel chain started using it and told others about it. Suddenly we had actual paying customers, then bigger clients, then investors calling us. Marcus and I had to hire people, get a real office, the whole deal. I remember the day our first big enterprise client signed on, a national restaurant chain with locations in 42 states. I came home ready to celebrate, and Sophia was there with news of her own. She was pregnant with twins. It felt like everything was finally clicking into place. My business was taking off, we were starting a family, and even Robert had to acknowledge that my pipe dream was turning into something real. He actually clapped me on the back at the next family dinner and said, "Well, maybe there's more to app development than I thought." That was high praise coming from His Royal Highness. Ben and Kevin were born, and man, those first months were absolutely insane. Sophia's parents hired us this nanny I'll call Olivia, who was a complete lifesaver. I was splitting time between the exploding business and trying to be there for my boys as much as possible. We moved to a bigger house in a better neighborhood. This time I actually contributed to the down payment, though Sophia's family helped again, making sure the house was mostly in her name for tax purposes. Meanwhile, her family's jewelry chain was struggling badly. Online retailers were eating their lunch, and Robert refused to adapt to the changing market. People want to feel the quality before they buy jewelry, he'd insist at family dinners. You can't replicate that experience online. I offered to help them build an online presence, maybe even develop an AR app where customers could see how jewelry would look on them before purchasing. Robert just waved me off dismissively. We've been successful for 4 generations without internet gimmicks. I just sat there biting my tongue. What was I supposed to say? Congratulations on proudly ignoring 2 decades of technological progress? The truth is, the only thing older than their jewelry was their thinking. But hey, far be it from me to interrupt the downfall of a legacy built on gold and arrogance. By year 6, the app was being used by Fortune 500 companies. We had 47 employees, and I'd gone from broke coder to CEO of a legitimate company. We were getting acquisition offers, but I wasn't ready to sell yet. I was building something that really mattered, something that solved real problems for an entire industry. But things at home were getting weird. I noticed Sophia started taking Pilates lessons 4 times a week and joined this fancy health club that had women-only events that always seemed to run late. She was posting on Instagram from places that definitely weren't our town when she was supposed to be with the kids. Olivia, our nanny, would send me pictures of the boys at their preschool play while Sophia's Instagram stories showed her at some resort pool hundreds of miles away. I was busy as hell, but I'm not stupid. Something wasn't adding up. I started noticing other changes too. Sophia bought a new car. Nothing crazy, just a BMW X7 that cost more than all the vehicles I'd owned in my life combined. When I asked about it, she said it was safer for the boys than her old Lexus. She redecorated our living room with furniture that definitely wasn't from her family stores. New clothes, new jewelry, new girls' trips to spas and wineries, all while I was working 65-hour weeks growing the business, being there for my sons as much as possible, and trying to be a good husband to a wife who was increasingly absent. I wasn't about to turn into some paranoid husband stalking his wife's location or digging through her phone like I was 12 years old. That's not who I am, but I'm not blind either. The Pilates lessons that always lined up with Olivia, taking the boys out for activities. The late-night, women-only networking events. The conveniently timed marketing retreats that seemed to happen every other week. It all felt off, but I kept quiet because I don't move without certainty. You don't debug a system by guessing. You collect data, you wait, and then you strike when there's no room for denial. So I stayed patient, watching it all stack up like evidence in a court case. The moment I knew for sure wasn't some dramatic discovery of texts or lipstick on a collar. It was at dinner with my boys, who were now 5 years old. I was trying to get them to eat something besides dinosaur-shaped chicken nuggets. A losing battle, let me tell you, when Ben said something that stopped me cold. "Daddy, why don't you give hugs like Mommy's friend Alex?" he asked innocently. "He picks Mommy all the way up." I kept cutting nuggets into smaller pieces, trying to keep my voice casual to keep him talking. "Who's Alex, buddy?" Kevin nodded enthusiastically. "Alex has big muscles and a funny voice. He comes over when you're at work and Olivia takes us for ice cream." "Ice cream, huh?" I managed, feeling like I'd been slapped across the face. "Does Alex come over a lot?" Ben shrugged in that way only preschoolers can. "Sometimes Mommy says he's her special Pilates coach. He has blonde hair," Kevin added helpfully, "and tattoos like a pirate." I kept asking questions, keeping my tone light and conversational, while something cold and hard formed in my chest. It turns out Alex was supposedly Sophia's Pilates coach, who sometimes came to help Mommy with exercises at our house. My 5-year-old sons had accidentally exposed everything with their innocent observations. That night, I went into my home office and checked our security system logs. When we'd moved into the bigger house, I'd installed this smart home system with cameras that recorded when doors opened and closed. I'd done it mostly because I was paranoid about the boys getting out or someone breaking in. I never thought I'd be using it to catch my wife cheating. Sure enough, on days when I had late meetings or was traveling for business, there was Sophia letting in some muscular blonde dude when Olivia took the kids out for their activities. The timestamps matched perfectly with when Olivia would text me pictures of the boys getting ice cream or playing at the park. No private investigator needed. My own security system and my kids had given me all the evidence I could ever want. I wasn't even that surprised, honestly. We'd been living completely separate lives for months. Me building my company, working my ass off, and her doing whatever the hell she wanted with the family money. But bringing this guy around my kids, in our home, while I was out busting my ass to build something real, that crossed a line I didn't even know existed. I sat there in my home office at 1 in the morning, scrolling through months of camera footage, watching this stranger enter my house while I was out working. All those nights I thought she was too tired for intimacy because of the kids or work stress. Nah, she was just saving her energy for Pilates boy. I did some digging online. It wasn't hard to find a Pilates instructor named Alex in our area. Turns out Coach Alex worked at the country club, giving private lessons to bored rich housewives. His Instagram was full of shirtless photos showing off his tattoos and motivational quotes about finding your inner strength and other inspirational bullshit. The dude looked exactly like what you'd expect. A blonde Ken doll with tribal tattoos and the kind of carefully cultivated stubble that takes more maintenance than a clean shave. Part of me, the version that still remembers what it felt like to count change for gas money, wanted to kick in the door, drag Sophia and her discount Pilates instructor out by their matching hair extensions, and give the neighborhood a show they'd never forget. But the man I'd become, the one sitting at the helm of a growing company with employees, investors, and real skin in the game, decided to keep it classy. No shouting, no dramatic scenes, just quiet moves and airtight evidence. So I waited a couple more days, got my ducks in a row, and called my lawyer. Not some family friend, but someone I'd hired specifically for my business. I had him look at that prenup I'd signed years ago and asked about my options. I quietly made copies of all the security footage and started documenting everything with timestamps and dates. Then I confronted Sophia after the boys went to bed. I didn't make accusations or start screaming. I just said calmly, "Tell me about Alex, the Pilates coach." The look on her face was priceless. First shock, then this weird relief, like she was actually glad to stop pretending. But she didn't apologize or try to explain. Instead, she literally laughed and poured herself a glass of wine. "What are you going to do about it?" she said, with this smug confidence that made my blood boil. "My family owns everything. Your name isn't on the house, the cars, nothing. You're just the help who happens to sleep here." I stayed calm, which seemed to piss her off even more. "The boys told me about your friend, about how you bring him here when I'm working and they're out with Olivia." "So what?" she snapped, downing half her wine in one gulp. "You're never here, always at your precious company. Alex pays attention to me." "Does he pay attention to you at the Ocean View Resort too?" I asked. "Because that's where you checked in last month when you were supposedly at your mom's book club." Her face went completely white. I showed her my phone with screenshots of her Instagram stories, complete with geotags and timestamps, plus calendar screenshots showing the boys' school play scheduled for the exact same day. "You've been tracking me," she sputtered, suddenly looking less confident. "Didn't need to," I replied evenly. "You posted your affair on social media, Sophia. Not exactly detective work, though our home security system has some interesting footage too." Then came the threats. How her family would destroy me in court. How she'd take the boys and I'd never see them again. How I'd lose everything in the divorce because of that prenup I'd signed. I just nodded and said we'd let the lawyers sort it all out. "What? You think your little app makes you untouchable?" she sneered. "Daddy will hire the best lawyers in the state. You signed a prenup, remember?" I smiled for the first time that night. Oh, I remember. I definitely remember that prenup. She had absolutely no idea what was coming her way. And the thing is, I didn't take revenge on them. She trapped herself all on her own. What Sophia didn't know was that I'd already gone through that prenup with a fine-tooth comb after hiring my lawyer. I mentioned before that the document her daddy forced me to sign had a mutual infidelity clause. If either party cheated and it could be proven in court, they forfeited rights to a significant portion of marital assets. At the time, it seemed like another way to screw me over if I ever stepped out of line. It never occurred to them that their precious princess would be the one getting caught with her pants down. I didn't tell Sophia any of this, though. It was better to let her and her family think they had all the power and control. People make mistakes when they're overconfident, and I wanted them as cocky as possible. 3 days later, I got this text from Robert. "Family meeting, our house, 6 p.m. tonight. No lawyers." I knew exactly what was coming, but I decided to go anyway. Might as well hear their pitch firsthand and see how they planned to try to screw me over. I showed up to find Robert, Patricia, and Sophia sitting in their fancy living room like some kind of tribunal. Robert was positioned in his leather chair, looking all stern and important. Patricia had that fake, concerned expression that rich people get when they're about to screw you over, and Sophia just looked pissed off at the world. "We want to discuss this situation like adults," Robert started, using that condescending tone I'd grown to hate over the years. "Family matters should stay within the family." "We're not family anymore," I said calmly. "Not since your daughter decided to bang her Pilates coach in our house while my kids were getting ice cream." Patricia gasped like I'd physically slapped her across the face. "There's no need for that kind of language," she said with horror. "There's also no need to cheat on your husband," I replied without missing a beat. "But here we are." Robert cleared his throat loudly. "Marriages hit rough patches. Sophia made a mistake, but after 6 years together, surely there's a path forward that doesn't involve lawyers and public embarrassment." I almost laughed out loud. Of course, their main concern would be how this looked to their country club friends and business associates. "People make mistakes," Patricia added, reaching over to pat Sophia's hand like she was consoling a child. "Marriage is about forgiveness and working through difficulties together." "I've already retained counsel," I said simply, cutting through their bullshit. Robert's face hardened immediately. "That seems premature." After exchanging glances with Patricia, he leaned forward in his chair. "Let's put our cards on the table here. The prenuptial agreement was designed to protect Sophia and our family assets. It was appropriate when I had nothing," I finished for him. "When your financial circumstances were different," he corrected smoothly. "When there was a significant imbalance in what each party brought to the marriage. But the situation has evolved," Patricia continued, picking up the rehearsed script. "The prenup was intended to protect Sophia in case you left her with nothing. But now, you're a successful entrepreneur worth what? 18, 22 million on paper? Sophia has given you her youth, her support, her connections. She's made sacrifices for your success." When I didn't respond immediately, Patricia pushed harder. "She's the mother of your children. She deserves recognition for her contributions to building your life together." "Support?" I repeated, looking directly at Sophia, who couldn't meet my eyes. "Is that what we're calling hooking up with your Pilates coach now?" Robert's jaw tightened visibly. "We're not here to litigate past mistakes. We're looking toward an equitable resolution that benefits everyone involved." "The prenup is the resolution," I replied. "The one you insisted on. You should have spent less time lawyering up and more time thinking about your daughter's real hobbies. That document is outdated and morally unbalanced," Patricia declared, practically spitting the words. "It would be unconscionable to enforce it now, given the changed circumstances." "Unconscionable," I said, letting the word hang in the air. "You didn't find it unconscionable when it protected your daughter? Only now that it might protect me." "You've forgotten your place," Robert said, his fake politeness finally cracking completely. "No one expected you to actually succeed on this scale. This was supposed to be a safety net for our daughter, not a weapon for you to use against our family." There it was. The truth behind 6 years of fake smiles at Thanksgiving dinner. They never saw me as an equal, just a temporary inconvenience safely contained by legal boundaries. "So what exactly are you asking?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "We want you to voluntarily set aside the prenup," Robert stated bluntly. "Negotiate a fair settlement acknowledging Sophia's contributions to your success." "Contributions," I repeated. "Like what?" Sophia finally spoke up for the first time during this whole charade. "I was there from the beginning. I believed in you when no one else did." "You were physically present," I corrected her. "When you weren't traveling or screwing your Pilates coach. Did you ever test the app, offer feedback, understand what I was building, or did you just enjoy the lifestyle it provided?" She had no answer for that. I continued, "I've been on calls at 2 in the morning with developers in India. I've missed vacations to fix server issues. I've skipped dinners to close deals that kept our company afloat. Where were you for any of that?" I looked at each of them in turn. "The agreement stands. Sophia receives exactly what the prenup specifies. And FYI, that prenup has a fidelity clause. Cheating voids any claims to marital assets. I have video footage of Alex entering our house 28 times in the last 4 months. I have text messages. I have location data from her social media posts. The stunned silence that followed as I walked out felt better than any comeback I could have dropped on them. What came next was all business. The divorce was fast and absolutely brutal. It turns out that prenup her daddy made me sign had this little section about infidelity that nobody thought would ever apply to his precious daughter. If either party cheated, they forfeited any claims to marital assets they didn't directly purchase or inherit. Their hotshot lawyer tried everything to invalidate it. Called me coerced, said the terms were unconscionable, argued that circumstances had changed. The judge wasn't buying any of it, especially after seeing the evidence of Alex, the metadata from tagged photos, and hearing statements from Olivia about the Pilates lessons. I'll never forget the day in court when Sophia's attorney, this Brooks Brothers poster boy named Jeffrey, tried to argue that I had trapped Sophia by weaponizing the prenup. "Your Honor, Mr. Hartwell had his daughter sign this agreement under duress. Jeffrey argued with practiced outrage. He never expected it would be used against her in this manner. My lawyer, Diana, this absolute shark I'd hired based on her reputation for handling tech industry divorces, just smiled like a predator who'd spotted wounded prey. To be clear, Your Honor, Mr. Hartwell wrote this agreement, not my client. He insisted on its execution 2 hours before an engagement party. Now he's claiming inequity because the clause he inserted is being enforced exactly as written. The irony is quite remarkable. The judge, this older woman who'd clearly seen it all in her years on the bench, just peered over her glasses at Sophia's family. So your argument is that the agreement is unfair because it's being applied to your daughter rather than to her husband. Jeffrey sputtered something about changed circumstances and unconscionable enforcement, but the judge was having absolutely none of it. The infidelity clause is mutual, applies equally to both parties, and was inserted by the party now objecting to its enforcement. Motion to invalidate denied. Sophia's side looked like someone had pulled the rug out from under them, which, ironically, was probably one of the overpriced items they used to sell in their stores. Robert just sat there like a man who'd spent his entire life believing he controlled every outcome and couldn't process the fact that this one had slipped through his fingers. Their lawyer tried to salvage what he could from the wreckage, but the damage was done. They thought they'd cornered me years ago with that prenup, but it turns out they'd handed me the exact weapon they'd always feared I might use. And I got full custody because Sophia couldn't show stable housing or income after everything went down. She gets supervised visits twice a month that she sometimes bothers to show up for. But the real bomb dropped outside our divorce case. Their jewelry business was collapsing faster than a house of cards. Years of refusing to modernize had finally caught up with them. They had taken out massive loans using their properties as collateral to keep the business afloat. When 4 major suppliers demanded payment and they couldn't make it, everything unraveled at once. I heard about it from Marcus first. Dude, did you see what happened to Hartwell Jewelers? They just laid off like 65 people from their corporate office. I started paying attention to the business news after that, and it was even worse than I'd imagined. Turns out Robert had been hiding the company's financial problems for years. Online retailers had been systematically eating away at their market share, but instead of adapting to the changing landscape, he doubled down on the high-touch luxury experience that fewer and fewer people actually wanted. They had opened expensive new showrooms in upscale areas, just as foot traffic to retail was plummeting nationwide. The math was simple and brutal. Their overhead costs were skyrocketing while their revenue was tanking. It was a textbook case of how not to run a business in the digital age. The prenup meant I kept my now successful company while Sophia got exactly what she brought to the marriage: family connections to a failing business that was hemorrhaging money. She went from posting Instagram stories about luxury resorts and spa weekends to moving back in with mommy and daddy just as their empire was crumbling around them. But here's where karma really came knocking with a sledgehammer. When their family business declared bankruptcy, there was an asset auction to liquidate everything. Guess who had the capital and the spite to buy their remaining inventory, their warehouse space, and their brand name? That's right, me. I didn't even want to be in the jewelry business, but the look on Robert's face when he realized I now owned the company his grandfather had started was worth every penny I spent. I was there at the auction, sitting in the back row, not hiding exactly, but not drawing attention to myself either. The auctioneer was methodically going through the lots: inventory, buildings, intellectual property, brand names. Most of the bidders were other jewelry companies looking to pick up assets on the cheap. When they got to the Hartwell Jewelers brand name and trademarks, I raised my paddle with quiet satisfaction. Robert was sitting at the front of the room, looking like he'd aged 15 years in the 8 months since our divorce was finalized. When he turned around and saw me bidding on his family legacy, I thought he might have a stroke right there in the auction house. The color drained from his face completely. I didn't get everything, didn't want everything, but I got enough to make my point. The brand name, the customer lists, their flagship showroom downtown. It was poetic justice served with a side of financial devastation. The final twist of the knife came 4 months later when the bank foreclosed on their lake house, the same place where they'd cornered me into signing that prenup years ago. I bought it at the foreclosure auction too, turning it into a weekend place for me and my boys. The first weekend we stayed there, Ben looked around at the massive living room with its soaring ceilings and asked innocently, "Isn't this Grandpa's house?" "It's our house now, buddy," I told him, ruffling his hair. Sometimes things change in ways we don't expect. And boy, did they ever change. Sophia calls me crying once a month, blaming her parents for everything that went wrong. They made me sign that stupid prenup with that clause about cheating. She'll sob into the phone. They said no man would ever build anything worthwhile marrying me. They ruined everything. The thing is, she's not entirely wrong about her parents setting her up for failure, just not in the way she thinks. They raised her to believe she was untouchable, that rules were for other people, that money could fix any problem or erase any mistake. When our marriage hit the inevitable rough patches that all marriages hit, instead of working on our relationship or communicating like adults, she found validation elsewhere because that's what she'd been taught to do her entire life. Take the easy path and let money clean up the mess later. Meanwhile, my sons and I live in what used to be their showcase home. Ben and Kevin are in therapy because, as it turns out, watching your mom's affair unfold and your grandparents' public financial meltdown isn't exactly great for kids. But they're resilient little dudes who are adapting better than I expected. Olivia stayed with us through everything. She still takes the boys for ice cream, only now it's a reward for good behavior, not because their mom's Pilates coach is coming over for a workout session. They see Sophia twice a month during supervised visits that she shows up for about half the time. When she does show up, it's usually to complain about her living situation or ask if I can help her get back on her feet financially. The audacity is honestly impressive. Last I heard, Alex, the Pilates instructor, is working at a resort in Miami, probably coaching some other rich housewife through her midlife crisis. The company's doing better than ever. We expanded into adjacent restaurant software products, went international, and last year got acquired by a major enterprise software company. I stayed on as CEO of our division with a sweet compensation package and enough money to never worry about prenups again. I eventually sold the jewelry business to a competitor who actually knew what they were doing with it. Keeping it would have just been petty at that point, and I didn't have time for that kind of negativity in my life. The boys and I redecorated the lake house completely, got rid of all that stuffy formal furniture that nobody could actually sit on, and replaced it with stuff we can actually put our feet on and be comfortable. Sometimes when I'm sitting on the dock at what used to be their lake house, watching my boys fish and laugh together, I think about that day I signed the prenup. I was so intimidated by their money, their status, their family legacy that I let them back me into a corner. I signed a document I barely understood because I was afraid of losing a woman who ended up betraying me anyway. Sophia and her family thought they were so smart with their prenup, their fancy lawyer, their "you're just a nobody" attitude toward me. But karma comes for everyone eventually, doesn't it? Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. And if you take anything from my story, let it be this. Never let anyone make you feel like you don't deserve your success. The irony is beautiful when you really think about it. They created the very weapon that destroyed them. That prenup was supposed to be my cage, but it became their trap. Robert spent so much time protecting his family's wealth from me that he never considered protecting it from his own daughter's poor choices. They were so focused on keeping me in my place that they forgot to teach their princess about consequences. I learned something important through all of this. Success isn't just about building something valuable. It's about building something that can't be taken away from you by people who think they're better than you. My company, my skills, my work ethic, those things were mine, regardless of what any prenup said. But their whole identity was built on inherited wealth and social status, things that can disappear when you make bad decisions. The best part is that my boys are learning from all of this too. They're seeing that hard work pays off, that actions have consequences, and that sometimes the people who look down on you end up needing your help. Ben asked me the other day why mommy doesn't live with us anymore. I told him that sometimes adults make choices that hurt their families, but that doesn't mean we stop loving them. We just learn to protect ourselves. These days, I'm focused on being the best father I can be and continuing to grow the business. The boys are thriving in their new school, we've got a great routine going, and honestly, life is pretty damn good. Sometimes I get messages from other guys going through similar situations, asking for advice about dealing with wealthy in-laws or protecting themselves in relationships where there's a financial imbalance. My advice is always the same. Know your worth, document everything, and never sign anything under pressure. But most importantly, build something that belongs to you and you alone. Something that can't be taken away by legal documents or family politics. In the end, that's what really matters. The Hartwell family thought they could control the narrative because they had money and connections. They forgot that in the digital age, success comes to those who solve problems and adapt to change, not those who coast on their grandparents' achievements. They learned that lesson the hard way, and frankly, they deserved every bit of what happened to them. Justice isn't always immediate, but it's usually thorough when it finally arrives.